It was a typical Wednesday afternoon in Mrs. Peterson's AP biology class at Riverside High School in Denver, Colorado. The October sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the laboratory tables where we were dissecting fetal pigs. My lab partner, Jessica Martinez, was carefully making her first incision when the principal's voice crackled through the intercom system. "Attention all staff and students. This is Principal Williams. We are implementing an immediate lockdown. This is not a drill. All teachers, secure your classrooms immediately and follow lockdown procedures." The tone in his voice was different from the usual announcements. There was an urgency, almost a tremor that made my stomach drop. Mrs. Peterson, who had been helping another group with their dissection, immediately dropped what she was doing and rushed to the door. Her face had gone pale as she turned the deadbolt and switched off the lights. "Everyone, move away from the windows and get to the back corner," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Stay quiet and stay low." 23 students quickly abandoned their lab stations and huddled together in the corner farthest from the door and windows. The smell of formaldehyde still hung in the air, mixing with the scent of fear that seemed to permeate the room. Jessica grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve. We sat in darkness for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes when we heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that didn't belong to any teacher or administrator I knew. They were moving slowly, methodically, stopping at each classroom door. Mrs. Peterson pressed her finger to her lips, her eyes wide with terror. The footsteps grew closer, and we could hear the sound of door handles being tested. Some were locked, others weren't. From down the hall came muffled screams, then silence. When the footsteps reached our door, they stopped. The handle turned slowly, but the door didn't budge. Then came the knocking, soft at first, then more insistent. A man's voice, disturbingly calm, spoke through the door. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing." 2 girls near me started crying silently, tears streaming down their faces. Marcus Thompson, who sat behind me in regular classes, was shaking so violently I could hear his teeth chattering. The knocking continued, becoming more forceful. "Open the door. I just want to talk." Mrs. Peterson had positioned herself between us and the door, holding a pair of dissection scissors in her hand. Her knuckles were white, and I realized she was prepared to defend us if necessary. The voice outside changed, becoming more agitated. I said, "Open the door." Something heavy slammed against the door, once, twice, 3 times. The wood creaked but held. Then we heard more footsteps, running this time, and shouting from the other end of the hallway. "Police! Drop your weapon!" What followed was chaos, shouting, more running, and then a sound that made everyone in our classroom jump. A single gunshot echoing through the hallways of Riverside High. After that, silence. We remained huddled in that corner for another 45 minutes before Principal Williams came back on the intercom, his voice noticeably shaken. "The threat has been neutralized. Police are conducting a sweep of the building. Please remain in your classrooms until an officer comes to escort you out." When Officer Martinez finally unlocked our door, the relief was overwhelming. Several students broke down completely, and Mrs. Peterson collapsed into a chair, finally allowing herself to shake. Later, we learned the details from news reports. A former maintenance worker named David Chun had been fired from the school district 3 months earlier for erratic behavior and threats against staff. He had somehow obtained a key card and entered the building through a service entrance during lunch. Armed with a knife and what appeared to be a handgun, which turned out to be a realistic-looking pellet gun, he had been searching for the administrator who had terminated his employment. He had entered 3 classrooms before reaching ours, terrifying students and teachers but not physically harming anyone. The police had cornered him in the main office, where he had barricaded himself. The gunshot we heard was Officer Rodriguez firing a warning shot into the ceiling when Chun lunged at him with the knife. Chun was arrested and later sentenced to 8 years in prison for terroristic threats, trespassing, and endangering the welfare of minors. The investigation revealed he had been struggling with severe depression and paranoia following his termination, believing the school district was part of a conspiracy against him. Mrs. Peterson took early retirement at the end of that school year. She told me during my graduation ceremony that she couldn't shake the image of that door handle turning, couldn't sleep without checking her own locks multiple times each night. Jessica transferred to a private school before Christmas break. She said she couldn't concentrate in that classroom anymore, couldn't focus on anything without thinking about what could have happened if that door hadn't been locked, if Mrs. Peterson hadn't reacted so quickly. The school installed additional security measures after the incident, more cameras, electronic locks on all classroom doors, and a full-time security officer. But for those of us who were there that day, who heard that voice through the door and felt that paralyzing fear, no amount of security could erase the memory. I still have nightmares sometimes, 5 years later. In them, I'm back in that biology classroom, huddled in the corner with the smell of formaldehyde in my nostrils, listening to footsteps in the hallway and waiting for a door handle to turn. In my dreams, though, the door isn't locked, and Mrs. Peterson isn't there to protect us. The most disturbing part isn't what happened that day, but what almost happened. Chen's original plan, according to court documents, had been much worse. In his apartment, police found detailed floor plans of the school, schedules of staff meetings, and a manifesto describing his intentions to make them all pay. The pellet gun was meant to be intimidating, but the knife was real, and his anger was genuine. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Officer Martinez had been delayed by even a few more minutes, if Chen had been more determined to break down our door, if Mrs. Peterson hadn't acted so quickly to secure our classroom. The what-ifs keep me awake some nights, reminding me how thin the line can be between a scary story and a tragedy. That day changed all of us who lived through it. We learned that the safety we took for granted could be shattered in an instant, that the walls of our school couldn't always protect us from the darkness that exists in some people's minds. It was a lesson none of us wanted to learn, but one that has stayed with us ever since. Franklin Middle School in Tucson, Arizona, sits at the corner of Mesa Street and Highland Avenue, surrounded by a quiet residential neighborhood that's been home to working families for decades. The single-story houses with their gravel yards and chain-link fences had always seemed harmless to us seventh graders who walked past them every day on our way to and from school. It was a Thursday in late November when everything changed. The morning had started normally enough. I was in second period English with Mr. Rodriguez, discussing the symbolism in The Outsiders, when we heard what sounded like firecrackers going off outside. Phoenix Williams, who sat by the window, looked out and said it was probably just construction work on Highland Avenue. We continued with our discussion of Ponyboy Curtis and the Greasers until the principal's voice interrupted us over the intercom. Mrs. Thompson's usually calm demeanor was replaced by something urgent and frightening. Teachers and students, we are implementing an immediate lockdown due to an incident in the neighborhood. This is not a drill. Please follow all lockdown procedures immediately. Mr. Rodriguez moved quickly to lock the door and turn off the lights. Everyone away from the windows, he said, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly as he pulled down the blinds. Find a spot along the back wall and stay quiet. My friend Sarah Chun grabbed my hand as we huddled together with the rest of our classmates. The room fell into an eerie silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional siren outside. We could hear them getting closer, fire trucks, police cars, maybe an ambulance. After about 20 minutes, we heard shouting from the direction of the houses across from the school. It was a man's voice, angry and desperate, screaming words we couldn't quite make out from inside our classroom. Sarah squeezed my hand tighter. "What do you think is happening?" whispered Jake Martinez, who was crouched next to us. Before anyone could answer, we heard Mr. Peterson, our assistant principal, talking quietly in the hallway with someone else, probably a police officer. We caught fragments of their conversation through the door. Domestic situation, weapons, barricaded. The shouting outside continued, becoming more erratic and violent. We could hear the man clearly now, his voice carrying across the schoolyard. "You can't take my house. I'll die before I let you take my house." Then came the sound that made all of us jump, a loud bang that echoed off the buildings. Sarah let out a small gasp, and Mr. Rodriguez immediately moved closer to us, positioning himself between our huddled group and the windows. "Is that gunshots?" whispered Maya Patel, her voice barely audible. Mr. Rodriguez put his finger to his lips but nodded grimly. More bangs followed, and we could hear police officers shouting through megaphones, trying to communicate with whoever was causing the disturbance. For the next hour and a half, we remained locked in that classroom, listening to the chaos unfold outside. The man's shouting became more incoherent, more desperate. At one point, we heard him screaming about the children and how he was protecting the children from the government. Sarah started crying quietly, and I realized I was shaking. This wasn't like the lockdown drills we practiced once a month. This was real, and the danger was real, and we had no idea how it would end. Finally, around noon, the shouting stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise had been. We waited, barely breathing, until Mrs. Thompson's voice came over the intercom again. "The situation has been resolved. Police are conducting a safety check of the building before we resume normal activities. Please remain in your classrooms until an officer comes to speak with you." When Officer Williams finally opened our door, the relief in the room was palpable. Several students broke down crying, and Mr. Rodriguez sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. "Is everyone okay?" Officer Williams asked, scanning our faces. We nodded, though I don't think any of us felt okay. Later that day, we learned what had happened from news reports and whispered conversations between teachers. The man was Robert Chun, no relation to my friend Sarah, who lived in the blue house directly across from our school's main entrance. He was 53 years old, unemployed for the past 6 months, and facing foreclosure on his home. That morning, the sheriff's deputies had come to serve him with an eviction notice. Robert had barricaded himself inside his house with what the police later discovered was his deceased father's hunting rifle and a box of ammunition. For 3 hours, he fired shots out his windows, shouting about conspiracies and refusing to surrender his home. What made the situation even more terrifying was what investigators found after Robert was finally taken into custody. He had been watching our school for weeks, taking photographs of students arriving and leaving, documenting our schedules and routines. His house was filled with notebooks containing detailed observations about our teachers, our security procedures, and even some of our names. The police psychologist later explained that Robert had developed a paranoid delusion that the school was somehow connected to his financial troubles, that we were part of a larger conspiracy to destroy his life. In his deteriorating mental state, he had convinced himself that harming the school would somehow save his house. The most chilling discovery was a calendar hanging in his kitchen, with several dates circled in red ink. That Thursday, the day of the lockdown, was one of them. So was the following Monday, and the date of our upcoming winter concert. Police believe he had been planning something far worse than a standoff in his house. Sarah's parents pulled her out of Franklin after winter break and enrolled her in a private school across town. She said she couldn't concentrate in Mr. Rodriguez's class anymore, couldn't stop staring out the window at that blue house where Robert had lived. Even though new tenants moved in after the foreclosure was completed, she said it still looked threatening to her. Jake Martinez developed anxiety attacks after the incident and had to see a counselor for several months. His parents said he would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced he could hear shouting and gunshots outside his bedroom window. The school district installed higher fences and security cameras around the perimeter of Franklin Middle School. They also implemented new procedures for monitoring potential threats in the surrounding neighborhood. But for those of us who lived through that lockdown, who huddled together in the dark while an armed man raged outside our windows, the feeling of safety never fully returned. I still think about Robert Chun sometimes, wondering what desperation and mental illness must have driven him to that point. The news report said he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for various charges related to the incident. I hope he's getting the help he needs, but I also hope I never have to see him again. That day taught me that danger can come from anywhere, not just from strangers in the hallways, but from the houses we pass every day, from people whose lives are falling apart just out of sight. It's a lesson that has made me more aware of the world around me, but also more afraid of it. The blue house across from Franklin Middle School is painted white now, with a neat garden and a swing set in the backyard. New neighbors, a young family with 2 small children, wave at us students as we walk by, but I still cross to the other side of the street when I pass by, still remember the sound of gunshots and shouting, still wonder what other secrets might be hidden behind the ordinary facades of the houses in our neighborhood. Working as an IT technician at Lincoln High School in Sacramento, California, was supposed to be my dream job. Fresh out of UC Davis with a computer science degree, I had landed a position maintaining the servers and network infrastructure at my old high school. The pay was decent, the work was interesting, and I got to reconnect with some of my favorite teachers who had helped me along the way. The basement office where I worked was surprisingly comfortable for a school facility. Located beneath the main building, it housed all the servers, network equipment, and data storage systems that kept the school's technology running. My workspace consisted of a modern desk setup with multiple monitors, high-speed internet, and blessed air conditioning, a luxury that the classrooms above couldn't afford in Sacramento's brutal summers. I shared the space with two other technicians, Marcus Johnson, a veteran who had been with the district for 15 years, and Amanda Rivera, a recent hire like myself who specialized in database management. We had become close colleagues over the past 6 months, often eating lunch together and troubleshooting problems as a team. On that particular Tuesday in March, both Marcus and Amanda were upstairs attending a faculty meeting about new educational software implementations. I was alone in the basement, working on a server upgrade while eating a sandwich at my desk, when my phone rang. "This is Kevin," I answered, expecting it to be Marcus or Amanda with a question about the meeting. Instead, it was Mrs. Patterson from the main office, and her voice was tight with stress. "Kevin, we're implementing an immediate lockdown. Someone has entered the building who shouldn't be here, and we believe they may be armed. You need to secure yourself in the basement immediately." My blood ran cold. What kind of threat? Should I call the police? They're already on their way. Just stay where you are, turn off all lights, and don't come upstairs under any circumstances. I have to go. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden silence of the basement. I quickly saved my work and shut down all the monitors, plunging the space into darkness. The only light came from the small LED indicators on the servers, casting an eerie blue glow across the room. The basement office didn't have a proper door, just an open archway that led into the main server room. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to barricade myself in. I grabbed my phone and sent urgent texts to Marcus and Amanda, but neither responded immediately. I crouched behind my desk, trying to make sense of the situation. Who would want to harm Lincoln High? What kind of threat were we facing? My mind raced through possibilities: a disgruntled former employee, an angry parent, maybe someone with a grudge against the school administration. The basement was eerily quiet except for the constant hum of the servers and the occasional click of the air conditioning system. I couldn't hear anything from upstairs, couldn't tell what was happening in the classrooms and hallways where hundreds of students and teachers were presumably hiding just like I was. 20 minutes passed before I heard the basement door open. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made my heart race. I assumed it was Marcus or Amanda returning from the meeting, maybe bringing news about the lockdown situation. "Marcus," I called out softly. "Amanda?" No response. The footsteps continued down the stairs, slow and deliberate. Something about the rhythm didn't sound right. These weren't the familiar footsteps of my colleagues. I pressed myself closer to the floor behind my desk, trying to become invisible in the darkness. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and began moving through the server room toward my office area. I held my breath, praying that whoever it was would just pass by, would assume the basement was empty and move on. Instead, the footsteps stopped right at the entrance to my office space. I could sense someone standing there, looking into the darkened room. My phone was on silent, but the screen suddenly lit up with an incoming text message, casting a brief glow across my hiding spot. "I can see you there," a man's voice said calmly. "Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them." My entire body went numb with terror. This wasn't Marcus or Amanda. This wasn't a school administrator or a police officer. This was the threat everyone was hiding from, and somehow he had found his way to the basement. I slowly stood up, raising my hands, In the dim light from the server LEDs, I could make out a figure in dark clothing standing in the doorway. He was wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform, navy blue shirt, work pants, and boots. In his hand was something metallic that reflected the blue light. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "What matters is that you're going to help me get back upstairs without anyone noticing." "I can't do that. The building is on lockdown. There are police everywhere." He stepped closer, and I could see his face more clearly. He looked to be in his 40s, with graying hair and tired eyes. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place where I might have seen him before. "You work here, right? You know this building better than anyone. There has to be another way out." I realized he wasn't here to hurt the students or staff. He was trying to escape from whatever he had done upstairs. My phone buzzed with another text message, and this time I could see it was from Marcus. "Lockdown because of armed intruder. Stay hidden in basement. Man shot Principal Harrison in parking lot. Wearing maintenance uniform." The man noticed my expression change as I read the message. "What does it say?" I looked up at him, finally understanding the situation. This man had shot our principal. He was the reason we were all in lockdown, the reason hundreds of students were huddled in darkened classrooms throughout the building. "It says the police are looking for someone in a maintenance uniform," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone who hurt Principal Harrison." His face hardened. Harrison had it coming. He destroyed my life, took away everything I worked for. 23 years I kept this place running, and he fired me over some budget cuts. I recognized him then, James Morrison, the head of maintenance who had been terminated earlier in the school year. I had heard rumors about budget cuts affecting support staff, but I hadn't paid much attention to the details. "Look, Mr. Morrison, I understand you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle it. Principal Harrison is probably going to be okay, and if you surrender now, he's not going to be okay." Morrison interrupted, his voice cold. "And neither am I. I just need to get out of here, and you're going to help me." He raised the gun. Because that's what the metallic object was, I realized with a sinking feeling in my stomach. I had never seen a real firearm up close before, and the sight of it pointed at me made my legs weak. "There's an emergency exit through the mechanical room," I heard myself saying. "It leads to the loading dock behind the cafeteria." Morrison nodded. "Show me." As we moved through the server room toward the mechanical area, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at it quickly and saw a message from Amanda. "Kevin, whatever you do, don't trust the maintenance guy if you see him. He shot Harrison and threatened teachers. Armed and dangerous." Morrison was walking behind me, close enough that I could hear his labored breathing. I led him through the maze of equipment toward the back of the basement, my mind racing. The emergency exit he wanted did exist, but it was alarmed and would alert the police the moment it was opened. When we reached the mechanical room, Morrison pushed past me to examine the exit door. "This leads outside?" "Yes, but Mr. Morrison, there's something you should know." He spun around, pointing the gun at my chest. "What?" "The door is connected to the fire alarm system. The moment you open it, every police officer outside will know exactly where you are." His face went pale. "You're lying." "I'm not. Look at the warning sign." I pointed to the bright red placard next to the door handle that clearly stated the alarm would sound when opened. Morrison stared at the sign for a long moment, then back at me. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the realization that his escape plan wasn't going to work. "This is all Harrison's fault," he muttered. 23 years of my life, and he throws me away like garbage. "It doesn't have to end this way," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "You can still surrender. You can still make this right." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Make it right? I shot a man in broad daylight in front of a school full of kids. There's no making this right." That's when I heard the sound of footsteps on the basement stairs again. Multiple sets this time, moving quickly and purposefully. Morrison heard them too and spun toward the sound, raising his weapon. "Police! Drop your weapon!" The voice echoed through the basement, amplified by the concrete walls and the metallic surfaces of the server equipment. Morrison looked at me one more time, and I saw something change in his expression. The desperation was replaced by a kind of resigned sadness. "Tell them I'm sorry," he said quietly. Then he opened the emergency exit door. The fire alarm screamed to life, drowning out everything else. Red lights flashed throughout the basement, casting everything in an hellish glow. Morrison disappeared through the doorway into the bright afternoon sunlight. I heard shouting from outside, then 3 quick gunshots. The alarm continued to wail as police officers swarmed into the basement, their weapons drawn, checking every corner and shadow. "Are you injured?" one of them asked me, and I realized I was sitting on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. "No," I managed to say. "No, I'm okay." But I wasn't okay. Principal Harrison survived his injuries. Morrison's shot had hit him in the shoulder, missing anything vital. Morrison himself was not as fortunate. The police officers waiting outside the emergency exit had given him multiple opportunities to surrender, but he had raised his weapon toward them instead. The investigation revealed that Morrison had been struggling with severe depression and financial problems since his termination. His wife had left him. He was facing foreclosure on his house, and he blamed Principal Harrison for ruining his life. He had used his knowledge of the building's layout to enter through a service entrance, planning to confront Harrison privately. When the confrontation escalated, Morrison had panicked and fired his weapon. I took a leave of absence after the incident and eventually transferred to a different school district. I couldn't work in that basement anymore, couldn't walk past the spot where Morrison had pointed a gun at me, couldn't look at that emergency exit without hearing the sound of gunshots and screaming alarms. Marcus and Amanda were understanding, but they didn't fully grasp how the experience had changed me. They hadn't looked into the eyes of someone who had already decided to throw his life away, hadn't felt the cold weight of a gun barrel pointed at their chest, hadn't watched a man walk toward his own death through a doorway. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something different, said something that might have convinced Morrison to surrender peacefully. But then I remember the look in his eyes, the finality in his voice when he asked me to tell them he was sorry. I think he had made his decision long before he encountered me in that basement. The incident changed Lincoln High School in fundamental ways. New security measures were implemented, including better access controls and monitoring systems for the basement areas. The IT department was relocated to a more secure location on the main floor, with proper doors and locks. But for me, the biggest change was internal. I learned that ordinary people can be driven to extraordinary acts of violence when their lives fall apart. I learned that split-second decisions can mean the difference between life and death. Most of all, I learned that sometimes being in the wrong place at the wrong time can give you a front-row seat to someone else's tragedy. I still work in school IT, but at a different district now in a different city. I love my job and the students I serve, but I'll never again take for granted the assumption that schools are safe spaces. That day in the basement taught me that danger can come from anywhere, from anyone, even from someone who once dedicated his life to keeping the same building running smoothly. The memory of James Morrison still haunts me sometimes, not just the moment when he pointed that gun at me, but the broken man I saw underneath the desperation. He had been part of the Lincoln High family for over 2 decades, and in the end, his pain and anger consumed not just his own life, but left scars on everyone who was there that day.